Over to you.
Well, I'm happy to be with you, but then I'm not quite happy because I have not been to Australia yet. So I've managed to travel to, I think, all other continents so far in my work here, but I'm still waiting for the opportunity to go to Australia. So that's sort of a request for an invitation at some point.
Very subtle. Noted.
Yeah. Well, what I want to we talked with Rose about like what to present. So what I would share like some perspectives like in more in general on mental health for the young adult group, sort of roughly the young adult group, what are challenges. So I'll do that, and then next. So we're doing two presentations. The next one will be more like COVID-19 specific. What is the situation that we're facing now with mental health? I apologize. I'm not fully up to date on everything that's going on in Australia. I've tried to look up like a few things, so I hope that is relevant. You know your situation, but I think what I'm going to share is general issues that we are facing, that young people are facing, that I think it's very important that we as a church are mindful of and that we are supportive of. This is really a difficult time for many people. And it seems like young people particularly are vulnerable in this situation, even though physically they are the most resilient when it comes to potentially COVID-19 infection. But mentally, they seem to be the most vulnerable group of all. So just like starting with a bit more like in general, where are we coming from? So can you see the screen? Yep. So mental health and well-being for young adults. And I'd just like to, I'm not going to do this as an Ellen White talk, everything, but I just, a couple of quotes that I like, that I think are relevant in this context. This one is from the book Ministry of Healing. If you haven't read that book, I really recommend to read it. It's not just for people who are interested specifically in health issues. It's really, I think, a good book on how to live life, and it's worth reading. So she says here, there is a need of coming close to people by personal effort. If less time were given to sermonizing and more time were spent in personal ministry, greater results would be seen. The poor are to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and the bereaved comforted, the ignorant instructed, the inexperienced counseled. We are to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those that rejoice. So it's then accompanied by the power of persuasion, the power of prayer, the power of the love of God. This work cannot be without fruit. And I think this is, to me, sort of an appeal, really, that we're not just going to preach to people, but we ought to take part in their life, share in the life that they are living, and to support them and help them in whatever the challenges they are struggling with. And today, in many countries, what many of the young people are struggling the most with are mental health issues, social issues, more existential issues about how to live life and what is the purpose and meaning of everything. Then another one that I also like, this is from the book Patriarchs and Prophets, she says, we're all woven together in the great web of humanity, and whatever we can do to benefit and uplift others will reflect in blessings upon ourselves. The law of mutual dependence runs through all classes of society. And my concern, my big concern when it comes to mental health issues, that this, what she calls the great web of humanity, it's not very strong at times. Many people struggle with loneliness, with being disconnected from other people, and that leads to a lot of mental health issues. When I started in psychiatry working with patients, and I've done a lot of psychotherapy with patients. That's been my preferred way of working with patients. I'm not sort of the typical doctor who just prescribes medication, but I've worked at institutions where we're allowed to focus on psychotherapy and counseling. And it didn't take me long as a beginning psychotherapist to realize that what many people struggle with, I would say, it's the fundamental issue is that there's not sufficient and not enough good love in people's life. People are lonely, they're struggling. It's relational pain that many people are struggling with, and that's fundamental to their mental health issues. Just how long should I go on for now, and then before we break and take some questions?
Whatever works for you.
Well, I have the issue. I'm naturally a very shy person, and my fear is always that I won't have enough to say, so I won't fill the time. But I'm just realizing more and more, like I talk too much, so I can keep going on forever sometimes. So sort of like.
Does anyone have any questions? Like, not yet? Happy for him to roll on a bit? Okay, yeah, feel free to roll on a little bit.
But just, should I, like in half an hour, should I aim to be done with this part in about half an hour? Is that?
That'd be good, yes.
Yes, okay, good. So I just can pace myself. Good. So what is mental health? And sort of that's been a challenge. It's a challenge sometimes with these definitions, with terms we use all the time. But when we actually try to define them, we find out that it's quite difficult. But this is one proposed definition by the World Health Organization. And I think it's a good one. And they say that mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Don't know sort of what you think about that, if it makes sense, if you feel that encompasses things. If you look closely, what you will see that one thing that is missing in a way, it's that it's not really talking about symptoms. It's not talking about specific illnesses. It's focusing more on what the person is able to do and how the person is able to live life. And that's one thing I actually like about this definition, is that it allows for that you can say people can have mental health, good mental health, even living with potentially could be mental illness. So it's allows for that people actually can have various kinds of symptoms because they are so common, they're so prevalent, many of these issues, to have some kind of symptoms. But the thing is, as long as we're able to function and can live meaningful lives, we can become who we have the potential to be. We can cope with the normal stresses of life, and we can make a contribution to our community and to our world. Then, according to the World Health Organization, we can still say they can have a good quality of mental health still. And since you're working with young people, I also like this. I think the second part is important. With respect to children, but I would also say adolescents and young adults, an emphasis is placed on the developmental aspects, for instance, having a positive sense of identity, who they are, the ability to manage thoughts, emotions, and also I would add, like, to tolerate them, to recognize them, to live with them, but also to manage them, as well as to build social relationships and the aptitude to learn and to acquire education, ultimately enabling their full active participation in society. So that's one, like trying to conceptualize what are we meaning, what we're talking about when we're talking about mental health. Someone who is able to live a meaningful, productive life, not absence of any kinds of emotional pain, symptoms, or struggles, because that would just be utopic to imagine that in the world that we are living. This is another report. This is actually from a report that the United Nations released in May last year about what could say the mental health pandemic that we are seeing coming alongside with the COVID-19, or following with it. So where are we coming from? Mental health issues, they are a huge burden to the global economy, costing about $1 trillion. I don't know how much money that actually is, but it's a lot of money. But then also putting it into perspective, there are about 8 billion people in the world today. Of these 8 billion, about 1 billion are estimated to be suffering from some kind of mental disorder. 1 billion, that's about 1 in 8 in the world, are suffering from a mental illness. And when we're talking about an illness, we're talking about someone who ought to be treated for it. We know still that just a fraction of this number of people are actually getting appropriate help. Many also of those who are getting some kind of mental health treatment support, they get a low quality treatment. And this is a challenge around the world, including in Western high income countries. We estimate about half of all people who are in need of treatment don't get any kind of treatment. And in less developed countries, it's much less. So anxiety, about 300 million people struggle with anxiety, the same with depression. So these are the two big ones. And globally, about 800,000 people every year die due to suicide. And many of them, it's related to mental illness, mental pain in some way or another. Then what's interesting, and especially for you who work with young people, is that we estimate that about half of all people who at some point will struggle with mental health issues, they start struggling with these issues already before they are 14 years old. This is not like diabetes or cardiovascular disease, where sort of it may be some like the price you pay maybe for a poor lifestyle coming later on in life. Many people, the big burden of mental health issues people are experiencing that at a young age. It starts early, and that's why prevention and support at that stage is so important. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in young people aged 15 to 29 globally. The second leading cause of death. Number one is accidents. It's no physical illness. There's no other things. It's accidents is what robs the most young people, or the biggest number of young people, of life. Number two is suicide. And every suicide, it's a tragedy. And in principle, every suicide is preventable. But it's an indication, again, that many people are struggling. Then we also know people with severe mental health conditions die in general 10 to 20 years earlier than the general population. And this has been well documented. So this is a serious issue. It impacts significantly the lifespan of people who struggle. Then I went and did some research on Australia to make it bring it close to home for you, far away from me. But still, what do things look like in Australia specifically? And this is a database that it's much used, has comprehensive data from around the world. So just trying to give you some perspectives, and don't be overwhelmed by these graphics. I'll try to explain them. This one illustrates what we call years lived with disability. That means, like, of the total, what people are struggling with, what they are suffering from at various ages or stages in life, from newborn till 100 years old approximately. What are the health burdens that people are struggling with? I won't go into all of them, but if you see the dark blue one here in the middle, this is mental disorders. So this is an indication of how big this is how many of people in this age group are struggling with this issue. What is the burden of disease in this age group? And here you can see from year 10 to 14, this category here, more than 30% of the burden of disease in this age group is mental disorders. And you can see it continues throughout young adulthood, even to the middle of life, where mental disorder is a major issue in this population. So mental disorders really is a big challenge for people in this age group. Another graphic. This is more this is focusing on mental disorders specifically. How common are they? How many are struggling? And again, with age, how does this develop? And you can see here when we hit the 10 to 14-year-old group, then we see a huge part of this group are struggling with some kind of mental disorders. Increases still more up to here. You can see this is 25,000 out of 100,000. This is the number of people in this very moment in this age group who are qualifying for a mental disorder. And that means they should actually be in treatment for that. They should be getting support. So you can see here, 10 to 14 years old, more than 20% are struggling with some kind of mental illness. The big ones, you see this one, the purple, that's ADHD. And then the other ones, these two, this light one here, that's depression. This is anxiety. So when you come in here to 15, 29, more than 1 in 4, it increases even further. I guess this comes close to 30% of this age group actually would qualify for some kind of mental disorder. So then sort of the question, well, what does it look like in our population within the church, our young people? We don't have numbers for that, but I don't think there is reason to believe that our young people differ significantly from the general population in these issues. So when you're working with your young people, you can assume that maybe about 1 in 4 actually is struggling with some kind of mental disorder. You may not see it, you may not notice it, but they have, because of that, they have challenges struggling with emotional pain that goes with it. These are some graphics, like more what is the trend we are seeing back from 1990 up to today. 2019 are the most recent numbers. These are, again, sort of the kind of disorders: depression, anxiety, ADHD. Sort of, it may not be very exciting, this graph. What you basically see, these things are quite stable on the same level. What is disappointing is that we are not really getting better at preventing these issues. The numbers are anything but decreasing when it comes to mental health issues. I think this is for 20 to 24-year-olds. This is 25 to 29-year-olds. This is 30 to 34-year-olds. You see, basically, it's the same pattern. So this means, even though we think we've made some progress, hopefully, on treatment, how to manage these issues, still there are a lot of people who are struggling with it, and sort of it seems like the trend is slightly upwards on these issues. Then suicide, which is sort of the outcome we fear when it comes to mental health issues. And these are Australian numbers, how many deaths annually per 100,000. And I just, for comparison's sake, I've included also like people who are killed by others, interpersonal violence. This is the green one. So you can see this is the green one, is killed by others. The purple, people who kill themselves. And you can see there's a lot of people relatively to the ones who die by the hand of others. What you see here also from age 15 to 19, starting to really increase. It's high to adulthood. As people get older, it decreases somewhat. And then, as we know also in the elderly, we have an increase in suicide rates. So again, this is like, fortunately, suicides are rare, even with people who have mental illness. If we estimate like the numbers globally, say that there's 1 billion people who have some kind of mental illness. There's less than 1 million every year who die to suicide. So that means that there's less than 0.1% of the ones who struggle with mental illness who actually complete a suicide, but still is very common. We estimate that suicide attempts, there are about, for every suicide, there's somewhere a rough estimate between 20 to 40 suicide attempts. So suicide attempts are much more common, and suicidal thoughts are basically very common with mental health issues. I've always, when I work with patients, if I had someone, patient, I would always ask if they had suicidal thoughts, and I would always be surprised if someone would say they don't have anything, they never had that. Would say that's almost the exception, that people who struggle significantly with mental health issues don't have any kind of suicidal thoughts. And that's why I think it's also very important to be aware of that, and also to be sensitive to that. Say in your population of youth, young adults, if 1 in 4 is struggling with mental health issues, there's a significant number of those who may be having suicidal thoughts. And if you realize that someone is struggling with mental health issues, if you have any kind of concern or worries about the person, if they may be having suicidal thoughts, then talk with them about that. Ask them about that. You don't make it worse by talking with them, asking them about that, and being supportive in trying to help them with whatever there is. This is like the suicide trend for Australia, and I can't see now if this was the specific age group of this. I think this was, I'm not sure what I did. I can't see the whole myself. If you see it, maybe. But again, this is for various age group also pretty much the same. The good thing is sort of it's not going up, but it's still significant. And again, this is something that we should be concerned about. Then briefly, just how do we typically treat the mental health issues? And psychiatry sort of went through a revolution in the last couple of centuries. Before that, mental health issues were very much considered that they were caused by moral or spiritual supernatural problems. Unfortunately, this way of understanding mental health issues still remains, and especially to some extent in Christian communities, also Adventist settings, often we attribute mental illness sometimes to spiritual, moral issues, and also suggest that the solution should be sought and will be found in that. I'm not in any way sort of denying that moral issues or spiritual issues don't play a role. They definitely do in our lives. But I definitely hope that you also will contribute to counter that kind of thinking, that it's just if you read the Bible and pray, then that will solve the mental health issues. I wish it were that simple, but it's not. So psychiatry has sort of transitioned into a more biological understanding, realizing this is a brain disorder, and we're now sort of moving more to understanding it's a whole body issue. In many cases, it's not just about neurotransmitters in the brain, but it's very much about processes going on in the body, chronic stress, immune system activation, lifestyle. These things seem to play a major role also in mental health. But our treatments they started out very much like what we call talking cures, from psychoanalysis with Freud to more cognitive therapies that are popular today, various kinds of treatments. There's no perfect psychotherapy that will solve all problems. People are different, they need different approaches, but this has been also where we have progressed. Various kinds of brain stimulation therapies, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock, sort of some people are scared of that, can be very efficient in some cases. But then we've also, like in the last decades, medication, psychopharmacology has become very important in treatment of mental health issues, maybe too important, so that it becomes sort of, we think maybe, or sometimes we maybe approach it as if just the right medication will solve most problems. Again, in most cases, medication alone is insufficient. It can be very helpful in some cases, other cases it's not. What I would like to then, and where I think sort of also we as Adventists have something to contribute, is more the lifestyle aspect of mental health. It hasn't been given really a lot of attention so far in psychology, psychiatry. It's growing, but still can do more. And this is where I think as we are working with young people who are embarking on adult life, trying to figure out how they want to live, what kind of people they want to be, these lifestyle issues, and in various ways how we can support healthy lifestyle, which will benefit people not just mentally, but definitely also physically. This is not very complicated in a way, because whatever is good for the body, it's also good for the brain and the mind. So these principles that we have promoted for a long time as Adventists, they very much apply. But reality is, many young people, they struggle with these issues. I wrote an article in Adventist Review on mental health and lifestyle that I'm referencing in the rest of it. What I want to focus on, like the 4 aspects, which I think are so important. And I think as we do the next talk, talking about COVID-19 and how that has affected us also, I think these play a role also, and especially the relationship part, the connection part with other people, where many have been struggling and affected people a lot. But I'll just run through, like, these are things that well are important, but we just emphasizing them when it comes to also mental health issues, and also because many young people are not doing life optimally in this area. Sleep, it is what we recognize now, and we recognize it more and more, how important it is for health. There's one book that is really good if you are interested in sleep and issues. It's called Why We Sleep, written by Matthew Walker, a sleep scientist from Stanford. And he really argues for the importance of sleep, and call it, it's maybe the most, says maybe the most of exercise, nutrition, and sleep. Maybe sleep is the most important, and I think he may be right. Without proper sleep, it's very difficult also to get the other things right. And we all know the effects of sleep. If we don't sleep well one night, we don't function as well in the following day, and that's because our brain and our bodies isn't working as well. What we know, sleep deprivation destabilizes the brain, impairs memory function. It's very difficult actually to be an efficient student if you don't sleep enough. You waste a lot of energy by trying to learn things that your brain just is not able and capable of storing properly if you are sleep deprived. So students should definitely try to sleep enough, and that's typically about 8 hours a night. Mood regulation also is difficult. If you're sleep deprived, easily to swing between extremes of emotion. Then if the brain is underslept, the frontal lobes, that is very much our control center, it struggles with regulating emotion, impulsivity, and reward seeking. Does not function well in this regard. Then there we have the risk of negative mood, depression, anxiety, increases irrational actions and decisions, aggression, behavioral problems, and addiction is significantly increased. This is what we know from research, and these are many of the things that we're trying to avoid and protect our young people from. And many of these issues can potentially be traced back to sleep. We know that sleep disruption, issues with sleep, is a symptom of mental illness, but insufficient sleep may also lead directly to mental illness. Alzheimer's is probably not what young people worry the most about, but we now know that's also a connection, probably with Alzheimer later on in life, and sleep, chronic sleep deprivation. So most adults should have 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Kids and teenagers should have more than that. Unfortunately, many kids and teenagers are more on an adult sleep pattern, sleeping the same number of hours as adults. Because of that, many of them are chronically sleep deprived, with the behavioral problems, the learning issues that they may have because of that, and the emotional issues. So this is just an appeal to that. Also encourage good health behavior in young people on this. Exercise, also now recognized very important for good mental health. Many people who exercise regularly, they do it just as much because of the positive effects on the mind as it has on the physical, or the physical benefits. I have to say that for myself also. If I don't exercise, that definitely negatively affects how I feel. The challenge is sort of, if you get out of exercise, it can be very hard to get in again. To get up the motivation, but we know it's very, very beneficial. People who exercise regularly, they have significantly fewer days of poor mental health, report that, than people who don't exercise. And exercise may be both preventative, but also have therapeutic effects on various mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, and others. We know that the effect of exercise can be about on the same level as medication in cases of depression. That doesn't mean that one substitutes the other, but it just shows how potent exercise can be for mental health issues. So you have kids who struggle mentally or have behavioral problems, addiction problems, whatever it is, then encourage them to exercise. Thing is, when people are tired, when we are depressed, that's typically when we feel the least like exercising. That's actually when we may need it the most. But also that's when we are maybe most likely to skip it. So, and again, anything is better than nothing. So people don't need to run marathons, but encourage people to be physically active and build it into your programs if you can also. I hope it's okay, like build it into programs so you can make sure they get enough sleep when you do events. They will be easier to manage, the young people, if you do that. Nutrition, now more and more recognized also how important that is for mental health. Generally, it's the principles that we have promoted as Adventists. Felice Jacka, I think she's Australian. She's considered one of the leading experts on nutritional psychiatry now. She says that diets, there's a book she published 2019, diets higher in whole foods such as vegetables, fruits, whole grain cereals, beans and legumes, nuts, seeds, fish and olive oil are consistently associated with reduced risk of depression. On the other side, diets higher in junk foods such as sugar-sweetened drinks, fried foods, pastries, donuts, packaged snacks, processed, refined breads and cereals are consistently linked with high risk of depression. And we have similar results also for anxiety and other issues. Again, supporting our young people in how their diet is can significantly help them. Then relationships, finally, and I think we can reflect more on that also. And I think that this is a big one, basically for us as we are a church community and provide community for our people. I think that's one of the major reasons why we have church, because God sees that we need the connection with other people where we can grow together, and it should be a healthy environment where people are taken well care of. So we know relationships are essential, and this is just the appeal. It's not good for man to be alone. The first thing that God said was not good even before sin entered the world, and that's just a fundamental truth about our nature, and also when it comes to our mental health and mental well-being. People need to be connected. We need to have quality relationships with other people, and that's also like what's for many people become difficult now during the pandemic. We need these intimate emotional bonds in nurturing relationships. That's essential. And as Christians, as Adventists, I think also to include the dimension, the relationship with God, it's what we also need to do here. We need both the connection, the horizontal connection with other people, and also with God. And I think when people are lacking one or both of those, but sometimes especially the connection with other people, they are very vulnerable to mental health issues and challenges. So I think that should be one of the clear objectives in everything we do as a church also, is how can we support the development of good relationships in people. So that was a quick run through. I hope it wasn't an overdose. So, but if you have a discussion.
Really appreciate that. Quite holistic and comprehensive. I'm sure that many of you may have some questions. If you've got a question, we've got 2 mics on either side of the room, so try and get closer to them if you're from far away. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to speak into one of the mics or near a mic.
I have one question, or maybe 2.
Can you hear that? Torben?
Yes, I hear well. Yes.
Yep. In regards to mental health issues, I know we're dealing with children, but I guess my question is, one of the biggest things I face as an objective with people outside of the church is religious trauma. And then can you comment on how we can prevent that as leaders for children and how we lead? Can you identify what types of, I guess, behaviours would cause religious trauma?
Did you say trauma in general, or did you say religious trauma? Or
Religious trauma, because I think, personally, I would think if it was mental health, that would be within our control, because you couldn't control mental health outside of the church when they come to us. We could help them, but as a church, would that be within our control? Would be that one of the things that would be, I guess, what's one of the things as Christians or as a church would cause mental health issues? Is religious trauma one of them and the biggest issue, or is there others that you know of? Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, you're asking sort of what aspects of religion could cause trauma, or
behaviors that we do, like that would cause religious trauma.
I'll try to comment. If I'm off, I don't understand the question, just correct me. It's an interesting question. I don't know how much I've reflected on that religious trauma and young kids or young people. What I think.
But some examples help.
Yeah, it would. I'm also sorry. It's late in the evening, so my brain is tired. So if I may not be the brightest, my best version of myself tonight. So it would be, but if you can and sort of if we can also like have a discussion. If I don't have all the answers. If you others if you want to discuss it also, then feel free to do that, and I'll come in with whatever I can contribute.
One of the examples I can give at the top of my head is where a child is turned away from church because, like you said near the beginning of your presentation, around sometimes it's not just God and prayer. Some people believe that it's just God and prayer that will resolve some stuff. And there are some people that, and you commented that some serious mental health issues can't be resolved with just that. And some kids, they actually leave church quite young because of that. And some adults too, but that's one.
Well, what I think, and I think that's what we know also from much of the research, and you probably know it as well as I do, also that oftentimes what turns people away from church is not that they disagree with our beliefs, but often there's relational issues, conflicts, and judgmentalism. I think like in the ideal church community, sort of we would sort of just accept that we are all sinners and we are struggling. People are struggling as they go through life. And I think especially we need to have a high tolerance when it comes to young people who are trying to figure out how to live life and how to become the person they want to become. I think like my perspective is that most people, they're doing their best as they're trying to figure out and how they live life. But especially like young people, they will try various things also that may not be according to the principles and maybe the teachings that we have as a church. I don't think sort of that I think like if we could be more patient with young people and allow them to do whatever experiments they need to do with life, but still be welcoming when they figure out this is not working for them. I think that would be a good thing that we as a church could where we could do things better sometimes than we do, rather than stigmatize people when they don't live up to all the expectations that we have. Like, thing is, like we all make mistakes in life. Some things are obvious, they're visible, and sometimes when young people make mistakes, it's very obvious and visible and becomes clear to us. But like, I think we all have made mistakes that we wouldn't want to be public. And I think to be able to have the kind of patience, tolerance, and forgiveness with young people, I think that could really help many and relieve a lot of like maybe some stress also that they may be experiencing. To be expelled or criticized in a church community, that sort of it's an extended family, and it can hurt a lot for especially young people in that age. So, and I think in that sense also, like the way to support and help is to develop real relationships with the young people as leaders. The more also maybe young people who have challenges, like the small things can often make a big difference. If they don't have good relationships in their life, people that they can trust as leaders, a little attention can go really a long way and make a big difference. And that's often what we're looking for. When I work with patients, it's also often like looking for, was there someone in your life at some point who was loving, kind, and supportive? Maybe even if they haven't, maybe a teacher in the church, it could be someone, a youth leader, pathfinder leader, someone who like saw the individual and took an interest in the individual. That can, even though that person may still be struggling a lot, that can be sort of build something where that person later on in life can connect with others and hope that they can build good connection and good relationships.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, this may be not a question for everybody, but thanks for sharing some, I guess, some treatment for mental health. What can you share with us as to what behavior we can watch out for some kids with mental problems, so we can work out through the solutions on time?
Yeah, I'll touch on that briefly in the next presentation. Sort of what are some of the like warning signs that we may see. So maybe we can save that for the next one. It's a long list of things you can be on the lookout for. But like in general, I would say when you see someone who have some kind of behavior that's not really like beneficial to the individual, problematic behavior, or someone who's struggling in relationships, that's when sort of you should start wondering if is something going on in the life of this individual. But it can also be like the super well-adjusted child or young adult who never causes any problems. The quiet ones, they're often overlooked. They can also be struggling significantly. So both those who act out and those who are super compliant, they're basically, one has to talk with them. So that again comes back to the relationship part. If you can develop that kind of relationship where they trust you, then that is the best way to gauge what's going on. Really asking them, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? What are you thinking about the future? These kind of questions, which are on the mind, or should be on the mind of young people.
I've got a question. Is there a difference in rates of mental illness between developed Western economies versus developing nations? And if so, what are those differences in mental illness attributable to? And then the third part of the question, what can we as a church do to try to help our people if there are differences?
Yeah, well, it sort of, sometimes we think maybe we have this sort of sense that mental illness is sort of more like a Western problem, and that is more common here. When you look at the statistics, the patterns around the world are pretty much the same. The issues that people struggle with, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, all these issues, like the fundamental issues, what we call the prevalence, how common they are, it's pretty much the same. You can see if you look, like America is the highest, then is Europe, then you get Asia, and then you get Africa. Sort of, if you look at sort of the numbers, there is sort of a slight drop. If that's sort of a real drop, or if it's just like how things are measured, that can be difficult to say. I've been in, had 2019, had a couple of trips to Africa, where I talked with people there, and like local people, and they had all the same issues that I'm used to from Europe, used to from America. The young people have the same issues that we are struggling with around the world. Sort of the manifestation of them, and sort of the stigma that goes with it may be somewhat different. I think in the Western part of the world, we have made more progress on that, and understanding that sort of mental illness doesn't mean that you're crazy, that you can be like, here we still have a long way to go, but we still recognize more that you can be a functional person, even though you're struggling with some mental health issues, that it's a spectrum of mental health issues. I guess in some countries they may be more sort of, if someone is psychotic, has a schizophrenia, they're like obviously mentally ill, then that may be sort of be recognized this as a mental illness. But maybe more depression, anxiety, these not so intense, maybe like sometimes not so intense mental disorders may not be recognized in the same way, and not talked about, and not dealt with in the same way. I would think it's more how it's dealt with and approached, and culturally accepted. I think that's more the difference than the actual sort of prevalence, how common the various issues are in various parts of the world.